We're going to talk about proven insights on direct-to-consumer monetization from the front lines. And for that, we've got Chip from FastSpring, who's literally here right now. He's going to come up and talk to us all about that. Chip, over to you, sir.
Great. Is this my clicker here?
Yes, that's your clicker.
Wonderful. All right, thank you. Hello. I'm Chip. I'm here from FastSpring. As you said, I will be talking to you about proven insights from direct-to-consumer. That was a great presentation we just heard. I think we can expect a little bit of overlap with that, but I'm approaching it from a slightly different angle. I come to you from the game development industry, leading some direct-to-consumer strategy, and I want to take some of the insights I got there and show you what I really heard to be effective in terms of marketing and monetizing web shops. But before I get into the content, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I do work for FastSpring. I'm the head of gaming there. FastSpring, for anyone uninformed, is an all-in-one direct-to-consumer payment platform for all of your gaming and digital product needs. We've been around for 20 years. We have a number of major gaming clients. We have a wonderful booth out there on the floor if you want to hear more. So please come by or just find me after the talk. For me personally, I just joined with FastSpring in October, so I've been there a few months. Before that, I did work in game development. So I was at Scopely, before that as a director of product, and I was there for a few years. And before that, I worked at SciPlay. And I worked at a few different hats in my time there. I focused on marketing, on monetization, on live ops. But most recently, I was focused on direct-to-consumer strategy and really growing web shops. So that's what I'll talk to you a little bit more about today. On a more personal note, I'm based out of Austin, Texas, over in the States. I'm father to one wonderful 7-year-old kiddo, and when it comes to gaming, I identify as a recovering completionist. I was doing well on that front, and then Tears of the Kingdom came out, and I had a relapse, but that's okay. So I want to talk to you through a little bit about the perception versus reality that I hear consistently coming up when it comes to direct-to-consumer and web shops. I'll talk to you a little bit about the normalcy of direct-to-consumer. I think the presentation before just touched on that in a really brilliant way, talking about how over 70% of games have web shops, and I'll look at it through a slightly different lens. Talk to you about the table stakes of direct-to-consumer, what I think are the basics when it comes to starting your web shop, the really foundational aspects that you need to start with, to build upon. But the real meat of the presentation will be these 5 proven insights, which are things I learned along the way as I was building web shops that I think could be helpful. So, when it comes to perception versus reality, I think when I talk with developers about potentially pursuing direct-to-consumer or more aggressively pursuing direct-to-consumer, I hear it framed almost as this tightrope walk. By pursuing this, we're putting ourselves in a precarious position, and there will be these dire consequences if we do it the wrong way. And not only that, but that it's this one-off project, right? That we just need to do this, and if we can get this web shop up and running, then we're harvesting these profits. We made it across the tightrope and we're solid. We accomplished our project. In reality, from my experience, it's much more akin to a marathon in that it's not something you can do tomorrow. You can't get up tomorrow and run a web shop. You need a lot of time and preparation and strategy to really make that effective and to get that off the ground. And not only that, but it's not a one-off project for your roadmap. It needs to become an ongoing initiative for your game in order to be successful and to continue to grow over time. And so I think it's very important when it's up front to understand what you're signing up for and what you need to do in order to get the most out of it, but also that the rewards can be more than enough to justify that investment. And beyond that is the normalcy of direct-to-consumer. And so when I think about this, I want to take a step back from gaming itself and think about if I want to buy a product, right? I want to buy a keyboard, buy a mouse, buy a monitor, anything. I know I, as a consumer, have the option to go through a distribution channel, like an Amazon, and I'll go purchase there, and I often do. Or I can go directly to the manufacturer. If I have a Logitech mouse I want to buy, I can go buy it on Amazon, or I can just go to Logitech's website and buy it myself. And that's just Logitech as the seller here, understanding they have a distribution channel they can use, or they can just sell it directly to their consumers. And when I think about D2C and gaming, I feel like it's become this loaded term of this secretive way that game publishers are sneakily eking out more profits that they weren't having before, when really I see it more as the evolution of gaming to a more traditional business model. It's saying we, as game developers, want to be able to sell our product directly to our consumer. And this isn't to diminish anything that Apple and Google have done. They are excellent distribution partners. They have built this entire industry when it comes to mobile gaming, and they will continue to be critical distribution partners for your game. But in 2025, a multi-platform distribution strategy is healthy. And I would argue it's even necessary for your game to achieve its optimal success. The last note I have is leading publishers investing heavily. This was touched on a lot before, but I like citing Playtika, mainly because, one, they're really successful in this area, and two, they publish this in a quarterly earnings report, so you can go look it up yourself. In their most recent report from Q3 of last year, we saw 28% of their revenue came from direct-to-consumer channels, which is incredible. And the even more incredible part to me is that it grew 8% year over year. And so this is a channel they're not only seeing success in, but they're seeing continued growth in this space. And that comes from that ongoing investment in a few different areas, which I'll get a little bit more into later. So if we're aligned on this being a normal business case and something that has become normalized for games, then it becomes, okay, how can I do that? How do I get this up and running? I call these table stakes because as I was first getting into direct-to-consumer strategy a few years ago, these are things I was reading then, right? This is kind of the foundational part. This is what you need to do at the most basic level in order to set up and run a web shop, which is one, you migrate players there with value, and two, a small percentage of players is a large percentage of revenue. And so a few examples on the value piece. The most basic implementation of this is you have greater volume per dollar, right? You say, I as a player know that a $10 purchase on the web shop will give me more than a $10 purchase on the mobile shop. And therefore, I will go make my $10 purchase on the web shop. And so that's one way you can do it. Certainly, you incentivize players with that value, but you can do it in other more creative ways too. And we've seen some games have a lot of success with this. You can have exclusive items. Maybe you start with cosmetic items. You say there's this special floral print. You can only get it if you purchase on the web shop. And so some players who want that cosmetic will start to migrate over there. If you want to be more aggressive, you could do non-cosmetic items. You can say, okay, we're going to have this special boost, and the only way players can get that item is by purchasing on the web shop. You can have web-exclusive subscriptions. One of the games that I had the privilege of working on is a mid-core title. We had a number of subscriptions on mobile, and we added a subscription that was exclusive to web, and it had a very unique value proposition. And because of the first point here, it was actually more generous than the subscriptions we had on mobile as well. And so what we saw as players subscribed there was that became a steady stream of web shop revenue, in addition to the more variable transactions that we would get on web shop. And so that was an excellent complement to our strategy. And another one is a bespoke currency shop. Let's say you don't have diamonds in your game, and then you start sourcing diamonds. You can source them however you want. You can be through live ops, through purchases, or wherever you want. But the only way players can redeem those diamonds is if they go to your web shop. Right? So you're getting players intrigued with this new and novel currency that's giving them an advantage. And then to use that, though, they have to migrate over to your web shop. And so these are all means of having value there that you're using to incentivize players to just visit your shop. And so that, I think, is the most foundational tenet when it comes to web shops. And the second, in terms of reach, is a truism for any game out there that a small percentage of your players can generate a large percentage of your revenue. This is true of every live service game I've seen. We're very VIP dependent. And so, for example, half your revenue can come from less than 2% of your players. Obviously, that can be more revenue, less revenue, bigger cohort, smaller cohort. But the point is, you don't need to get all of your players to your web shop. You can really focus on your most valuable players. And if you can just get those most valuable players over to your web shop and get them purchasing there, well, in doing so, you can actually shift over quite a bit of your revenue. And that could be your foothold, and then you expand from there, right? You either get them purchasing more frequently on web, or you expand your audience from there. And so, table stakes, basics, didn't want to gloss over them and assume they were covered, but I think those are important to start with. But what I really want to get into are these 5 things that I learned along the way. That I think can be insightful for anyone who's either looking to build a web shop for the first time and get it off the ground, or for someone who's already got a web shop and is looking to get even more out of it, which is really where more of my experience came in, is taking these mature web shops and optimizing them and trying to continue to iterate on them over time. So the first is to identify growth vectors relevant to your web shop, and this is true for both marketing and monetization. So I've worked on web shops for both casual games and mid-core games. And one of the things I observed on a mid-core game is we had all these beautiful channels at our disposal. Right? We had a blog that players would read. We had email campaign we could reach out to players for. We had social media channels that players would actually engage with. We had community forums. We had a Discord server. We had a subreddit. We had Twitch content. We had all these places players were communicating on the game, outside of the game, and we could use those to communicate about our web shop. Because when we think about the anti-steering policies from Apple and Google, Those only apply to the tip of the spear, the in-app comms. If we're talking about our web shop in email or in social media, we can talk about it much more freely and talk about that exclusive subscription that we're launching and why it's relevant and what value that has for the player. The casual game I worked on, by contrast, did not have these channels. It did not have a blog players read, didn't have email, certainly didn't have a Discord server, a subreddit, or any of those, right? And so on casual, what I observed was players don't talk about the game outside of the game. They just play the game, and that's the extent of their experience here, versus mid-core, where it's much more expansive. So on casual, we only had in-app comps. That was our only growth vector for our web portal, to make players aware of what we were doing on web and to communicate with them about anything new that we were doing on web. So did that mean we should not pursue this? No, absolutely not. It just meant we needed to have a very different strategy. It meant we had to laser focus on in-app comms to intimately understand those anti-steering policies from Apple and Google, to understand what we needed to do as a game developer to really maximize the opportunity there, and then adapt our strategy to communicate with players in that way. And so I think it starts with this. If I were looking at any game out there and how to do a web shop, I would look at the verticals available and say, okay, how will this impact us? Because it's not even just initially setting up the shop, it's also in optimizing that and creating a go-to-market plan over time. Any new feature you have on your web shop will be beholden to the growth vectors at your disposal here. And so it's imperative that you understand that and you can adapt your strategy to that. And the other part this impacts will be the ceiling on what you can achieve. Pragmatically, for the mid-core title, we had a much higher ceiling than we did on the casual title in terms of how much revenue we could expect to drive through our web shop in the immediate future. Now, over time, I imagine those will catch up to one another, but in the immediate term, it was much easier for us to communicate about our web shop on the mid-core because of some of the channels and growth vectors here that we had at our disposal. So that was the first lesson. And then from there, the second was minimize friction. And I almost hesitated to put this on here because I feel like it's pretty obvious, right? Like we as game developers, we're very familiar with friction. We'll put our first-time user experience under a microscope. We'll break it down to 70 steps, and we'll say step 37 that has a higher drop-off of retention, and we need to improve step 37 of our Fatui. But when it comes to web shops, the conversations I've had around friction always go to checkout. It always go to conversion rate. And I always say, okay, well, my conversion rate's fine, so my friction is fine. When really, it's this entire journey that we need to consider, because if we can improve friction at any step of this journey, that will improve how much revenue we're driving through our web shop. And I want to actually take a step back here and untangle a web portal and a web shop. At least for purposes of this presentation, a web portal will mean the full suite of web pages on your website. Right? So it could be a home page, leaderboards page, maybe a guide, tips and tricks, support, and oh yeah, a web shop. Right? Each of those can be different pages on your web portal. Whereas the web shop is very specifically the page upon which players monetize. And that distinction is critical because we know from the anti-steering policies we cannot route players directly from our game into a web shop. But if we have a page with content that's a legitimate complementary experience to our mobile game, okay, we can point players there. There's nowhere to monetize on that page, even if it happens to be on our web portal, where, oh yeah, there's also a shop we can point them to. For example, if we have a new feature launched in our game, and we give a very high-level overview, a few bullets in the game that says, hey, there's a new feature, here's what you need to do, but if you want more information, tap here. Tap there, it takes them to a page that's now on our web portal. And that has paragraphs of information, all the details players want. And then when they're there, oh yeah, there's a button for this web shop that we want to try to funnel them into. And that's the journey that's mapped out here. You go from game to web portal, then from web portal to get them into the web shop. And that's a critical piece of friction, right? It's what's that web shop visibility? How can we increase that click-through rate? Because if we do, that is an opportunity to drive more web shop revenue. And then, of course, web shop to checkout. And then one step we often neglect, from checkout back into the game. We assume, okay, these players just made a purchase. Like, they're going to go back into the game on their own. Generally, that's true, but maybe we can nudge them along the way and improve that rate a bit more. Right? We can say, okay, here's a button to take them back into the game. And then even once they get back into the game, did they immediately have that purchase? This will get a bit into the next slide, but we want to make sure that they have that purchase as quickly as possible. That's what they get on mobile, and therefore, that is what they expect when they purchase on web too. And this goes into trust. So in addition to minimizing friction, you want to maximize player trust. Trust is something we take for granted. It's something incredible Apple and Google have done, really. All of us make purchases in mobile games, and we don't have a second thought about, is my payment information safe? Am I in the right place to purchase for the game that I'm playing? It's all just second nature now, and it took a long time to get there. But when we have web shops, some cohort of players still has that doubt. They say, am I really in the right place to do this? I have to input my payment information again. I don't know how comfortable I feel with that. And so the point with this is that trust is top of mind for some of your players. And therefore, trust should be top of mind for you as a developer. It shouldn't be something you just assume is there. One example of a way to do this is by having a similar look and feel. Right? You want to have a similar look and feel of your web shop as you do for your mobile shop, because this will give players confidence they're in the right place. It doesn't need to be a one-to-one mimicry of mobile to web, but it should be very similar. And ultimately, where I've observed a lot of value is maintaining your brand consistency and your brand voice. If you do this, it will also help be consistent and increase your direct-to-consumer revenue percentage. The fourth is another one I hesitated with, stating the obvious here, but don't ignore engagement. Right? Just as there is value in a player playing your game today and not monetizing today, there's value in a player visiting your web portal today and not immediately purchasing today. Every conversation on D2C is focused on monetization. Every talk today, this talk was titled like, I don't know, best practices for direct-to-consumer monetization, right? It's all framed around monetization, but that shouldn't come at the expense of engagement. Engagement is critical too, and so anything you can do that drives engagement with your web portal is also valuable, because what you're doing is you're establishing trust. You're letting players know, hey, they're in the right place for this game. You're letting players know, okay, I can navigate this website. You're reducing friction because they're getting more comfortable with what exists and where, and ultimately you're driving awareness and habituation for your website. And so a few ways you can do this. You can have regular free gifts, literally just incentivize players for going to visit your web portal or even your web shop. You can have helpful guides there. As I mentioned earlier, you launch a new feature and you want to really detail that out. Put more of the content on your portal, and it becomes something that is complementary to players, where they know even if I'm not playing the game right now, I can go there to engage with this game that I love and get more content and be more informed. And so point here is stronger engagement is good. It's a good thing, even if that doesn't immediately raise your direct-to-consumer revenue percentage. And the last one is you have to monitor the evolving regulations. I think we're all just kind of observing and seeing what happens right now. That's the general feel I get from the industry. And things are changing quickly. Things changed a lot in the last year, and things will continue to change in 2025. And so it's critical that you have a trusted source to help you stay on top of these regulations. I don't know exactly what will change, but I can tell you with confidence that things will change. Things will continue moving in this direction. We have an example here from the FastSpring blog just from last month, and it was some movement we saw in Brazil. And I like this example because it represents 3 questions you should ask when these new rulings come along. It's what's within the scope of this regulation? Does this impact the language I can use in my game to talk about a web shop? Is it maybe making that a bit more liberal than what it was before? Is it impacting the landing page I can use from the web shop or from the mobile game into the web shop? Maybe I can actually start routing players directly into the web shop, which we cannot do today. And maybe it could be something else. There's a lot of directions this can go as we continue to iterate through this. And so it's important to keep an eye on what's within the scope of these. Secondarily, when does it take effect? Often there's a grace period. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months, could even be likely to be appealed by the impacted parties, right? So we'll see these regulations come down, but they may not take effect for months down the line. And so it's still good to be aware of them because you can prepare for the changes that are to come, but know that they don't take action until later. And lastly, where does it have an impact? In this example, it's from Brazil. You might say, Chip, I have like less than 1% of my revenue in Brazil. I don't care about that. I would say it's still critical to be aware because we've often seen these regulations become a bellwether. It's something other countries can look to and say, okay, we've seen this in Brazil, maybe we can iterate on that, and then we see things start to take shape and gain momentum on a global scale. And so by having that global perspective, you'll be more prepared and ultimately more responsive. You don't want to find out 6 months later that you could have been communicating things more liberally in your game, and when it came to your web shop, you're leaving money on the table in that case. And so it's critical to be plugged in and make sure you know what's going on throughout the year. So that's it. I think we're just hitting time, so real quick recap. Identify your growth vectors. Those will be unique for every game. Minimize friction with your players at each step of the journey. Maximize your trust. It is top of mind for some players. It should be top of mind for you. Don't ignore engagement. That's critical on web, just as it is for your game. And then monitor the evolving regulations. Those will change throughout the year. The more responsive you can be, the better you'll be. That's it. Again, I'm Chip. Please visit us, fastspring.gg. And I hope you have a wonderful show. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Again, there's a lot of this stuff that we need to be paying attention to in-game monetization in itself, and the fact that we now have other external access to do other things as well. And like you say, we have to watch this space because that's likely to change, and hopefully for the better, hopefully, but we shall see. Chip, thank you very much.